loungers right now. You know that. Because you like come and you take your sweater and like come into your space. Sure. We are live also. No, I'm gonna. Another liaison. Yeah. Yeah. What are you starting with? Just a motto. Very simple. I'm accompanying myself today, so it's gonna be it's gonna be different.
Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Is that working? Okay. So I want to welcome everyone this morning and to say hello to those with us in person and those who are streaming with us. And we're going to start this morning on page 140 with Matovu, How Good It Is to Be Together. Matovu, oh halechayamo, mishkenotah Israel. Matovu, oh halechayamo, mishkenotah Israel. We turn to page 146 and 147, and we rise for Birkot HaShachar, a series of morning gratitudes. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan l'zachrivinah le'achin ben laila. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani b'tzomo. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani b'chori. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, bokeach ivri. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, malbish arumi. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, matir asuri. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, zokef kefuf
אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם ברוך הארץ על המים ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם נעשה לי כל צורכי ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר הכין מצעדי גבר ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם עוזר ישראל בגבורה ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם עוזר ישראל בתפארה ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם הנותן לי כוח.
We're seated and we turn to page 218 for Shochein Ad.
שוכן עד מרום וקדוש שמו וכתוב רננו צדיקים באדוני לישרים נד בתחילה בפי שרים תתהלל ובדברי צדיקים תתברך ובלשון חסידים תתרומם ובקרב קדושים תתקדש ובמקלות ריברו עמך בית ישראל להודות להלל לשבח לפאר לרומם להדל לברך להלל ולקלס על כל דברי שירות ותשבחות דוד בן ישי עבדך משיחך ישתבח שמך לעד מלכנו האל הגדול וקדוש ברכות והודאות מעתה ועד עולם ברוך אתה אדוני אל מלך גדול בתשבחות אל ההודעות אדון הנפלאות הבוחר בשירי זמרה מלך אלכי העולמים יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה ילמד יברח חירותי ימליך מלכותי בחייכון ובימיכון ובחיי כל בית ישראל בגלה ובזמן קריב יאמרו אמן יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם יתברך וישתבח יתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא יתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמיר קדושה בריחו לילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן מעלמה ויאמרו אמן.
Continuing on page 224, we rise for the Baruchu.
ברכו את אדוני המבורך
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Leolam Va'ed.
ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Yotzer Or Uvarei Choshech Oseh Shalom Uvarei Kol. We're seated and turn to page 228 for El Adon, a psalm about creation.
El Adon al kol ha'ma'asim baruch umborach befi kol neshama godru v'tuvo malei olam da'at v'tuvuna sovevim oto amitgaleh al chayot ha'kodesh ledor v'chol השמש ויזרח אורה והתחין צורה הלבנה שבח נותני לו כל צבא מרום תפארו גדולה זרפים ואופנים וחיות הקודש.
We're continuing in prayer on page 234.
יתברך צורנו מלכנו גואלנו בורא קדושים. וכולם פותחים את פיהם בקדושה ובטהרה, בשירה ובזמרה, ומברכים ומשבחים ומברכים ומעריצים ומקדישים וממליכים את שם האל המלך הגדול הגיבור והנורא הקדוש וכולם מקבלים עליהם עול מלכות שמיים זה מזה ונותנים רשות זה לזה להקדיש היותרם בנחת רוח בשפה ברורה ובנימה כראשה כולם כאחד עונים ואומרים ביראה קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות מלוא כל הארץ כבודו והאופנים וחיות הקודש ברעש גדול מתנשאים לעומת שרפים לעומתם משבחים ואומרים ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו.
We turn to our responsive reading, which will be read on page 236, the champion of all just struggles.
God's creative power is in all that is new and worthy. God is with us when we struggle to make a better world.
When we struggle to promote justice for all, God's justice strengthens our resolve.
When we struggle to advance the triumph of truth, the God of truth fortifies our will. When we struggle to create a world at peace, the God of peace blesses our labors. May a new light soon shine upon Zion, and may we be worthy to delight in its splendor. Amen.
Turning to page 238, Ahava Rabbah. God has an abundance of love for us, and we ask God to teach us and to be gracious to us. Ahava Rabbah, Ahava Rabbah, Ahava Rabbah, Ahava Rabbah, Ahava Rabbah, Ahavtanu, Ahavtanu, Ahava Rabbah, Ahava Rabbah, Ahava Rabbah, Ahavtanu, Ahavtanu, Ahavtanu.
אתה אדוני, הבוחר בעמו ישראל באהבה. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבבך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך ובקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. והיה
Joining together in the middle paragraph on page 245. Therefore, keep these words of mine in your heart and in your soul. Bind them as a sign upon your arm and let them be a reminder above your eyes. Teach them to your children, speaking of them when you are at home and when you are away, when you lie down at night and when you rise up in the morning. Write them upon the doorposts of your homes and upon your gates. Thus your days and the days of your children will be multiplied in the lands which the Lord promised to your ancestors for as long as the heavens remain over the earth. Page 246.
אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמן.
Continuing on page 252.
תהילות לאל עליון ברוך ומבורך, משה ובני ישראל לכנו שירה בשמחה רבה ויאמרו כולם. מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך אין ארוך קודש, תורת תהילו תוסף מלך, תורת תהילו תוסף מלך. שירו חדשה שיבחו גאולים, לשמך שפת היום. יחד כולם הודו והמליכו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. צור ישראל, קומה בעזרת ישראל, ובטחי נאומך, יהודה וישראל. גול עלינו, אדוני צבאות שמו, קדוש ישראל. ברוך אתה אדוני, גאל ישראל.
Page 255.
יעקב, אלוהי שרה, אלוהי רבקה, אלוהי רחל ואלוהי לאה, האל הגדול, הגיבור והנורא, אל עליון, גומל חסדים טובים, וקונה הכל, וזוכר חסדי אבות, ומביא גואל לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם בעזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי מתים אתה רב להושיע, מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים, צומח נוכלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות ומי דומך, מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה להחיות מתים. ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי המתים. Yam ba da da da, ya ba ba ya ba ba ya ba bum. Yam ba da da da, ya ba ba da 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 ya da. Yam ba da da da, ya ba ba ya ba ba ya ba bum bum ba da da da, ya ba ba. נקדש את שמך בעולם, כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום. כך כתוב על יד נביאך וקרא זה זה ואמר, קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוא כל הארץ כבודו. אז בקול רעש גדול אדיר וחזק משמיעים קול, מתנשאים לעומת שרפים לעומתם, ברוך יאמרו, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומך, מלכנו תופיע ותמלוך עלינו, כי מחכים אנחנו לך. מתי תמלוך בציון, בקרוב בימינו, לעולם ועד תשכון, תתגדל ותתקדש בתוך ירושלים עירך, לדור ודור ולנצח נצחים. ועינינו תראינה מלכותך, כדבר אמור בשירי עוזך, על ידי דוד משיח צדקך. ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהיך ציון, לדור ודור, הללויה. לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, ולנצח נצחים, ולנצח נצחים, קדושתך נקדיש, ושבחה לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, כי המלך גדול, כי המלך גדול, וקדוש וקדוש אתה. כי המלך גדול, כי המלך גדול, וקדוש וקדוש אתה. ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הקדוש.
Continuing in quiet prayer. May the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. O source of peace and harmony in the universe, grant peace to us all, grant peace to Israel, and grant peace to humankind. Amen.
יתקרא ויקרא שמי רבה. אמן. ועלמא תברכנותי ולמלכותי בחייכונו ומכונו ופרו בית ישראל. וגלה ולפקרי ואימנו. רבה תברך. ועלה מעל מעיה. יתברך. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ותרומם ויתנזב ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודשה בריחו. לילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה. תושבחתה ונחמתה אמירן בעלמה ואימרו אמן. יתקבל צורותון ובתון זכור יזרוק קודם ובהון נפש מיה ואימרו אמן. יהי שלום הרבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו וכל ישראל ואימרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואימרו אמן.
After a beautiful Shacharit service, we turn to our Torah service, which we can find on page 312.
Ein kamocha v'Elohim Adonai, ve'ein kamasecha, malchutecha malchut kol olamim, u'memshaltecha b'chol dor v'ador. Adonai melech, Adonai melech, Adonai melech, le'olam va'ed. Adonai oz le'amo yitein, Adonai yevarach et amo v'shalom. Avraham heitiv avirtzonecha et Zion, tivnach omot Yerushalayim, tivnach omot Yerushalayim. Ki v'cha levad batachnu, melech aram v'nisa, Adon olamim. Vayehi bin Saharon, vayomer Moshe, Kuma Adonai, v'yafusu oyevecha, v'yanusu mis'anecha mipanecha. Ki mitzion teitzei Torah, ki mitzion teitzei Torah, udvar Adonai miYerushalayim. Baruch shenatan Torah, Torah. Baruch shenatan Torah, Torah. Le'amo Yisrael b'kedushato.
Continuing on page 316. May it be your will, O Lord our God, that you grant us a long and a good life. May we be numbered among the righteous. We ask you, God, to have compassion upon us and to guard us and those we love, and to watch over your people Israel, to nourish and sustain all. You, God, who are sovereign over all, even kings and queens, all dominion is yours.
Be'anarachet v'lishmei kadisha, kadisha yakira, ana emar tushbechan. Be'anarachet, be'anarachet v'lishmei kadisha, kadisha yakira, ana emar tushbechan. Yerava kodama detiv tachlibi be'oraita, v'tashlim mish'alin belibi, v'liba dechol ama Yisrael, l'tavul chayin v'lishlam. Amen.
Page 320.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo.
Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo.
Gadilul Adonai iti, uneromema Shemo yachtav, Lecha Adonai hagidula, ve'agivura, ve'hatiferet, ve'anetzach, ve'ahod, ki chov hashamayim u'va'aretz, ki chov hashamayim u'va'aretz, lecha Adonai hamamlecha ve'hamit, lechol erosh romemu, romemu, Adonai Eloheinu, ve'ishtachavu, ve'ishtachavu, lehadom raglav kadosh hu, romemu, romemu, Adonai Eloheinu, ve'ishtachavu, ve'ishtachavu, lehar kosho, ki kadosh, Adonai Eloheinu.
You may be seated. Torah portion this morning is Balak. Is that right, Howard? Balak? Getting it right? Yeah, we talked a little bit yesterday morning in Minyan about how somewhat confusing the narrative because you have two primary characters. Both of their names begin with a bet, B in English. So you have Balak and Balaam, or in the Hebrew, Bilam, which also, that's also confusing. Why not just use Bilam in the transliteration? So Balak is the king, Bilam or Balaam is the prophet, and the king is trying to hire the prophet to curse the Israelites. That's the narrative as we pick it up. Probably most notable and most memorable in the text is the story of the donkey that we see, and there's a conversation that ensues between the donkey and the prophet. Seems a little bit odd on the surface, and for those who read biblical text literally, that's kind of a problem, if you're saying that there's a talking animal, right, in the text. So a sage as great and wise as Maimonides, also a long time ago, said, no, you don't have to read this text literally. What's happening here is there is a dream that the prophet is having, and in the dream the prophet has, the conversation takes place between the prophet and the animal, because we all know that animals can't talk. So, what's that?
What about Mr. Ed?
Mr. Ed, well, there's exceptions to every rule. I used to watch Mr. Ed, but I always wondered about that too, actually. Why did we watch Mr. Ed? So the idea of not reading biblical text literally certainly is important to the way we understand our Judaism today, and it's been very important to the conservative movement as has developed historically. You can follow the text on page 903 in the Eitz Chaim Chumash, verse 1. If you're following at home and you have a different Chumash, then you're beginning of chapter 24, book of Numbers.
ויעזור ויגן וישלח על חוסים בו ונאמר אמן. הכל אבו גודל אלוהינו תנו כבוד לתורה יעמוד ראשון ברוך שנתן תורה לעמו ישראל בקדושתו.
ואתם הדבקים אדוני אלוהיכם חיים כולכם היום.
ואתם הדבקים אדוני אלוהיכם חיים כולכם היום.
Baruch hu et Adonai Hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim. V'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'torah.
Amen.
Amen. Vayar Bilam ki tov b'nei Adonai levarech et Yisrael v'lo halach kefam v'fam likrat nechashim vayashet el hamidbar panav vayisa Bilam et einav וירא את ישראל שוכן אל ישבתיו, ותהי עליו רוח אלוהים, ויישא משאלו, ויאמר נאום בלעם בנו באור, ונאום הגבר שתום העין.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam. Asher natan lanu Torah emet, chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. יעמוד שני.
Baruch hu et Adonai Hamvarach.
ברוך
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim. V'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'torah.
Amen. נאום שומע אמריאל, אשר מחזה שדי יחזה, נופל וגלוי עיניים. מה טובו אוהליך יעקב, משכנותיך ישראל. כי נחלים ניטעו כגנות עלי נהר. קהלים נטע אדוני, כרזים עלי מים.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torat emet, v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'torah.
אמן. יעמוד שלישי.
את Adonai Hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim. V'nata lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Yizal mayim midaleyav uzra'o b'mayim rabim vayarom me'agag malko v'tinase malchuto el motzio mimitzrayim kitafot re'yem lo יאכל גויים את שריו ועצמותיהם יגרם וחיצים אחת קרא שכב קרי וכלבים יקימנו מברכך ברוך ועוררך ארור.
atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam, asher nata lanu Torah emet, V'chayei olam nata b'tochenu, Baruch atah Adonai, noten haTorah.
Amen.
Pause at this time during a reading of Torah to offer prayer for those we know who are in need of healing, rising together for the Mishaberach prayer.
Yamad Revi.
Where? Baruch hu et Adonai hamavorach. Baruch Adonai hamavorach leolam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Vaycharav Balak el Bilam, vayspok et kapav, vayomer Balak el Bilam, lakov vaykraticha, vehine verachta baruch, ze shalosh pe'amim. ואתה ברך לך אל מקומך, אמרתי כבד אכבדך, והנה מנעך אדוני מכבוד. ויאמר בלעם אל בלק, הלא גם אל מלאכיך אשר שלחת אלי, דיברתי לאמור, אם ייתן לי בלק מלוא ביתו, כסף וזהב, לא אוכל לעבור את פי אדוני, לעשות טובה או רעה מליבי, אשר ידבר אדוני אותו אדבר.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu torat emet, v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
אמן. יעמוד חמישי.
et Adonai hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai hamvarach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amin. V'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'torah.
Amen. Ve'ata hineni holech le'ami lecha yiratecha asher ya'aseh ha'am hazeh le'amcha b'yacharit hayamim vayisa mishalo vayomar נאום בלעם בנו ואור ונאום הגבר שתום העין נאום שומע אמריאל ויודע דעת עליון מחזה שדי יחזה נופל וגלוי עיניים
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam, asher natan lanu Torah emet b'yei olam, nateh v'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'torah.
Amen. Yamot shishi.
Baruch Hu Adonai Amvarah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'chavanu mikol ha'amim v'nosan lanu es Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'torah.
Amen. Erenu velo ata ashurenu velo karov darach kochav miYaakov v'kam shevet misrael ומחת פתי מואב וקרקר כל בני שת והיה אדום ירשה והיה ירשה שעיר אויביו וישראל עושה חיל וירד מיעקב והביא שריד מאיר
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher nosan lanu Torah emes v'chayei olam natah b'sochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'torah.
Amen. Yamot shvi'i.
Baruch hu et Adonai hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Adonai Eloheinu melech olam. Oh,
Baruch
I did that. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'torah.
Amen. וירא את עמלק וישא משלו ויאמר ראשית גויים עמלק ואחריתו עדי עובד וירא את הקיני וישא משלו ויאמר איתן מושבך ושים בסלע קינך כי יהיה לבאר קין אדמה אשור תשבקה וישא משלו ויאמר אוי מחיה מסומואל וצים מיד כיתים ורינו אשור ורינו עבר וגם הוא עדי עובד ויקום בלעם וילך וישוב למקומו וגם בלק הלך לדרכו.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, v'chayei olam notah b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'torah.
Amen.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, ועלמד יברך חירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון ויומכון, ובחיי כל בית ישראל, בגלל בזמן קריב, ויאמרו אמן. ישי רב מבורך, לעולם ולעולם יתברך וישתבח, ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל, שמי קודשא בריחו לילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, תמירן בעלמה, ואמרו אמן.
Yamod maftir chazach.
May be seated. You can follow the Maftir reading, page 908 in the Chumash, page 908, verse 7, chapter 25, book of Numbers, 7th verse.
Baruch Hu es Adonai Baruch.
Baruch
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher b'charbona mikol ha'amim v'nasan lanu es teraso. Baruch Atah Adonai nosein ha'torah.
Amen. Vayar Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aharon HaKohen Vayakom mitoch ha'eda Vayikach romach beyado Vayavo Acharis Yisrael el hakuba Vayidkod et shnehem את איש ישראל ואת האישה אל קובתה, ותעצר המגפה מעל בני ישראל, ויהיו המתים במגפה 24,000.
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher nasan lanu teras emes. V'chayei olam nata b'socheinu. Baruch Atah Adonai nosein ha'torah.
Amen. Yamdu hamagbiya v'hagolel.
Please rise and honor the Torah.
בזאת התורה אשר שר משה לפני בני ישראל, על פי אדוני ביד משה. תורה, 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 ציווה לנו משה. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Morasha Kehilat Yaakov, Morasha Kehilat Yaakov, Morasha Kehilat Yaakov, Torah Tziva lanu Moshe.
May certainly be seated. We talk often about the connections between the text that the sages choose for the Haftarah reading with the Torah portion itself. This Shabbos, you find two connections. One is thematic, so the Haftarah text mentions characters that were talked about in the Torah portion itself. If you look on page 916, page 916 in the Chumash, we're in the prophet Micah, 6th chapter of his prophecy. And if you go down towards the bottom, verse 5, you see that Balak and Balaam are mentioned. So we read about them in the Torah portion. Sages know that they're talked about in Micah 6, so they say, let's match Micah 6 with the Torah portion to create the Haftarah text. A more subtle connection is a linguistic connection. In the Torah portion, you heard Ben chant one of the Torah's most famous verses, Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov. So we read that this morning. And the Haftarah text also contains one of the Bible's most famous verses. It's the last verse of this morning's Haftarah from Micah. Higid lecha adam matov. You hear that? Matov is in the verse Ma tovu ohalecha in the Torah portion. And of course, the verse from Micah, what does God require of you? Only to do justice, love goodness, and our translation, walk modestly with your God. Text will be chanted by Morris Sachs, and you can follow at page 915. If you're following at home, it's Micah chapter 5.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'neviim tovim v'ratzah v'divreihem hane'emarim be'emes. Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'torah u'Moshe avdo of Yisrael amo v'nevi'ei ha'emes v'tzedek. V'haya she'erish Yaakov b'kerev amim rabim ketal me'es Adonai kirvavim alei esev asher lo yukaveh la'ish v'lo yiyachel livnei adam. V'haya she'erish Yaakov Bagoyim bekerev amim rabim ke'aryeh bevahamos ya'ar kichfir be'adreitzon asher imovar v'romas v'torah fi'ein matzil tarom yadcha al tzarecha v'chal oyevecha yikaresu. V'haya v'yom hahu ne'um Adonai v'hichrati susecha b'kirbecha v'ha'avati markevosecha v'hichrati arei artsecha v'ha'arasti kol mivtzarecha v'hichrati cheshafim miyadecha u'monanim lo yiyulach v'hichrati fesilecha Umatzevosecha mikirbecha v'lo sishtachaveyot lema'aseh yadecha v'nasashti asherecha mikirbecha v'ha'amati arecha v'asisi bi'af uvchema nakam es hagoyim asher lo shameu. Shimuna es asher Adonai omer kum riv es heharim v'sishmana hagvaos kolecha. Shimu hariv es riv Adonai v'hai sonim moste aretz ki riv l'Adonai imamo ve'im Yisrael yisfakach. Ami me'asisi lecha u'maha elisicha anebi ki ha'elisicha me'eretz Mitzrayim u'mibeis avadim pedisicha v'yesh lach lefonecha es Moshe Aharon u'Miriam Ami zacharna me'ya'atz Balak melech Moav me'ona osa Bilam ben Beor min hashitim ad hagilgal leman da'as tzidkos Adonai Bama akadem Adonai ikaf leilahe maron ha'akadmenu v'olos ba'agalim b'nei shana ha'yirtzei Adonai b'alfei elim Bari vavos nachale shaman. Ha'etain b'chari pishi pari vitni chatas nafshi. Higid lecha adam matov. Uma Adonai doresh mimcha. Ki masos mishpat v'ahavas chesed. V'hatznei alecha sim Elohecha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam tzur kol ha'olamim tzadik b'chol ha'deros ha'el ha'ne'eman ha'omer v'yoseh hamdaberim kayim shekol davar rahav emes v'tzedek ne'eman atahu Adonai Eloheinu v'ne'emanim davarecha v'davar echad midvarecha achar lo yeshuv rekam ki el melech ne'eman v'rachaman atah Baruch atah Adonai, ha'el ha'ne'eman b'chol davarav. Rachem al Tzion ki hiveis chayenu v'la'alu vas nefesh toshia b'mheira v'yameinu. Baruch atah Adonai, mesamech Tzion b'vaneha. Samchenu Adonai Eloheinu b'Eliyahu hanavi avdecha. Umalchus beis David Mashichecha b'mheira yavo v'yagel libeinu al kisolo yesher zav v'lo yinchalu od acherim es kavodo ki v'shem kachecha nishbatalo shelo yichbenei ro leolam va'ed Baruch atah Adonai Magen David Al ha-Torah, v'al ha-Avodah, v'al ha-Nevi'im, v'al Yom ha-Shabbos hazeh, shenesata lanu Adonai Eloheinu likdusha v'limnucha lechavod ol sifares. Al ha-Kol Adonai Eloheinu, anachnu modim lach, umvarchim osach, yisborech shimcha b'fi kol chai tamid le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai. Mekadesh HaShabbat.
Well done, Morris, as always. Just want to acknowledge that it's slightly chilly in the room. I've never seen, there's some of you wearing talesim this morning. I've never seen you wear talesim before. So maybe that's a good thing. We are seeing if we can bump the temperature up just a little bit. So hopefully, I'm not sure if it will change, but do understand that it's chilly. And rising together, we're on page 340, returning the Torah to the ark, page 340.
Yeah, hallelujah, Shem Adonai, ki niskav shemo levado, hodo al eretz v'shamayim, v'yarem keren be'amo, tila lechol asida, livnei Yisrael, am kerovo, hallelujah, hallelujah.
Page 346.
Ki lekach tov natati lachem, torati al tazovu, et chaim hi, lamachazikim ba, v'tochecha me'ushar, derachecha, darchei nom, v'netivotecha shalom. Nashuva, Chodesh, Chodesh Yomeinu, Chodesh Yomeinu.
Shalom. So some of you mentioned to me, hi friends. So some of you mentioned to me on the way in that you saw the video that was posted on YouTube that I made on Thursday morning. And I hadn't really thought through that it was getting posted on Friday, and it said tonight I'm flying back, which is a little bit weird. But I made that video on Thursday, and I made it in Yerushalayim just to send sort of a message back and to connect with you from there. But for those who didn't see the video, it was basically just sharing what I had been up to over the last 10 days. And I wanted to share a little bit of that with you today, and also just share with you something that I've been thinking about, and hopefully just seeing if you will also think with me about what we might do with the situation. So first, can you hear me? Okay. So for 10 days, I have been in Jerusalem, specifically in Jerusalem. I went to Israel for the Shalom Hartman Institute's Rabbinic Torah program. And it is a really incredible program that I've had the privilege of doing about 5 or 6 times before. And Shalom Hartman Institute, for those who don't know, Rabbi David Hartman was a beloved and renowned modern Orthodox rabbi. His congregation that he served was in Montreal, Canada. He was there for 25 years. And he had a dream. And his dream as a congregational rabbi was that he wanted to create a place where, in Israel, where congregational rabbis really could come as a way to rejuvenate and to fill back up with Torah. He understood what the life was of congregational rabbis, and that was really his vision. And boy, did he ever create it. If you have the opportunity, if you're in Jerusalem, it's an incredible place to go and to study, and no longer is his initial dream reserved for rabbis. His son, Rabbi David Hartman, passed away a handful of years ago, and his son, Daniel, took it over. He took over the Institute, and they have expanded this dream and then some. So now, if I give you a little bit of a taste of what that meant, was before we came, the rabbis, 180 rabbis from all over the world, before we came this summer, the Hartman Institute was filled with lay leaders, so people from anywhere, right? People like you who wanted to come and be in Jerusalem and studying Torah and issues with some of the best thinkers imaginable. They had gone for 10 days prior to us, then we came, then they were doing a program for journalists, then they were doing another program for Palestinians and Israeli Jews together, right? It was unbelievable how many people were participating in cohorts of learning at Machon Hartman. So it was an amazing opportunity. What Hartman is throughout much of the year is a think tank. So they basically have wisdom leaders, right? They have these incredible thinkers that are thinkers of Torah and Talmud and Kabbalah and the geopolitics of the day, and their list goes on and on. It's a very expansive group of thinkers. And so they put really months and months and months into creating a 4-hour shiur or lesson that they give forth to us, and we then spend the rest of the time in Chavruta. But this year was a little bit different because they actually really wanted to explore the issue of Zionism and morality. Zionism and morality. And so what they did with that topic was they looked at this idea that initially the Zionist dream, right, was about having a Jewish homeland that was ours, where we could be independent entities, where we could make sure that we as Jews were safe, that we could basically have self-determination and self-rule and not have to worry about other people taking care of us, or worrying about being accepted, or worrying about belonging. And we could have this country, basically, that was ours to rule and ours to create. Anyway, fast forward, 74 years. And this Zionist vision really has been actualized, right? We have this Jewish homeland, and there's so much that we should be so proud of in terms of what the Jewish people and Israel has built. And then comes the question of morality, right? Like how sometimes when you have to concern yourself with safety and security, then sometimes there are other values that get trumped, because if they didn't, you wouldn't have safety and security, which in many ways has somewhat informed the relationship that we have within the Jewish homeland with others, those who live with us that are not Jews. So we did a lot of exploring. We actually, to Hartman's credit, they took us sort of out into the streets and a couple of tiyulim. We had the opportunity to meet with Arab Israelis, or Palestinians as they like to be called, and we had the opportunity to engage in real questions and thought-provoking ideas with people, with panels, and also with communities. So all of this felt really fascinating, and it also felt very hope-filled, because in many ways, one of the things that I was really recognizing as it being a part of those conversations is how much Israel has grown over the decades, right? In terms of how much we've sort of built, but also in terms of who we are as a nation, right? We've gone from infancy to being grown-ups. And being able to have these conversations thoughtfully really felt like a privilege. So the work that's being done on the ground, I will say this, in terms of the relationships between the Israeli Arabs or Palestinians and the Jewish Israeli population is really impressive. As I mentioned, Hartman is doing some great work. There's also a school system called Yad B'Yad, or Hand in Hand, that's doing incredible work. Their idea is that if you want to create a shared society, we need to be able to have relationships and to talk about our narratives. And so in Yad B'Yad and Hand by Hand, what they do is that each classroom in the school, each classroom has two teachers. It has a Jewish Israeli teacher and it has an Arab Israeli teacher, and they co-teach. And so, for example, if you go into a history class at Yad B'Yad, and now there are multiple campuses throughout Israel, if you go into a history class and they're teaching, what happened in 1948, you have that from a Jewish perspective, and then you have that from a Palestinian perspective. And it's super interesting that the students are learning to hold both of those narratives simultaneously. It's terrifying to some people, but to other people, they feel like this is a beautiful, beautiful vision of how we can coexist within within Israel. So all of this, as I'm sort of sharing it with you, feels incredibly hopeful. I want to also share that Jerusalem and Israel felt like they were thriving in a way that I haven't seen. I can't remember the last time I saw that. So I'm going to give you an example, but every day our program started at 8:30 in the morning, and it went until about 9 o'clock at night. And then we would have, Rafi was there for about a 5-day crossover with me. We would go for dinner at sorry, this is going to make people's stomach turns, but it was 9:30 by the time we went for dinner. And we couldn't even get into the restaurants. It was packed. And I had shared that on Thursday when I was about to leave, if I tell you just in Thursday night alone, Ishai Ribo, Cantor Blatt sings a votive service of his. Ishai Ribo was in concert at Sultan's Pool, right outside of the old city. You couldn't get a ticket. You could not get a ticket. At the same time as that, the President Biden was there on a visit, so that was creating a whole bunch of other parties that were happening. And then simultaneous to that, the Maccabi games were kicking off in Jerusalem, which were packed. If I tell you that on my way to the airport, you couldn't find a way out of Jerusalem. I could have walked faster than my car was taking me. And it was so funny because a bunch of us were trying to get to the airport at the same time. And one person went out by Sultan's Pool in the old city, another one went through Rehavia, another one through Talbiya. We're all trying to find our way to the airport. but there were just too many people filling the streets. And then there was like a food truck and beer festival, Rabbi Schwartz, happening at the same time. So it was like unbelievable what was happening in Israel, and it felt so safe, safer than I've ever experienced before. It just felt so good to be there. In fact, so good that we were talking about sending some trips next year. Rabbi Schwartz, I think, is going to go in March, so that's super exciting. And then I was like, maybe we could do another trip in October. You can't get a hotel in the entire city of Jerusalem in October. So it is like, what a day, what a day. So, okay, I've told you all of the amazing things that are happening in Israel, so now I want to tell you something that's not, though. So it was Thursday a week ago. It was Rosh Chodesh, the festival of the new moon. And for those who are actually, most of you are probably aware at this point, we all know the sort of traditional kotel. There's a men's side, and then they even have sort of an underground place, right? They've got an expansive place of prayer over there on the left side facing the kotel. And then on the right side is a women's section. And then on the sort of southern side, I would say, is it southern, Ben? Southern side, is Robinson's Arch. Robinson's Arch is sort of an interesting site. I actually think it's even more beautiful than the Kotel. And over decades, really, Natan Sharansky has been involved with this. The prime ministers have been involved with this. Anat Hoffman has been involved with this. They're basically trying to create an egalitarian space where people can pray at the Kotel, which is a southern excavation known as Robinson's Arch. Actually, the name of the shared site is Ezrat Yisrael. Okay, so I want you to hold that in your head. Everything is sort of fine. You know, there's a lot of big plans for Ezrat Yisrael, but essentially it's a place where we could all go and pray together as a community, right? There are no official prayer books there. The Sidurim are like typically the liberal community's Sidurim. There are mixed services that can happen there. Now, I want to actually separate this. Women at the Wall, which a lot of us read about each month, the Rosh Chodesh group that Anat Hoffman has been associated with over the years, that happens not at Ezrat Yisrael. That happens on the women's side of the Kotel, right? So just get that distinction, because that's a group of only women that want to have the Torah, they want to celebrate Rosh Chodesh, they want to read, they want to pray together. It shouldn't be a problem, but it becomes a problem every month. It becomes a problem because it's very uncomfortable to the ultra-Orthodox community. They come and they try to take the Torah away. They come and they throw things. Like, it's a very, very unpleasant experience. I've been there many, many years ago. It is somewhat traumatic. Okay. But go back to Ezrat Yisrael, this section that's supposed to be an egalitarian section at the Kotel. So this past Thursday, what had happened, not this Thursday, but the week before, is that 3 communities of people with 3 rabbis, all conservative rabbis, I believe. Felipe Goodman was one of them. They had congregational bar and bat mitzvah. So they had their b'nai mitzvah, were coming from the States just like we could do, and they were having their celebrations with family and friends who were able to join them at the Ezrat Yisrael. So you would have thought everything would have been fine, right? There was even security there. But what happened was in this particular moment, the boy who was becoming a bar mitzvah went in, with his family, with his friends, and then for some reason the security guards allowed about 50 Haredi boys and some dads to come in with them. Now, by the way, for Women at the Wall, nowadays they bus in girls and women who can be disruptive to that. But this was different. These were about 50 Haredi boys and, a handful of adults. And they came in, and while this while this 13-year-old boy was becoming bar mitzvah, they started heckling him. And they started heckling, and then it got worse. They started calling him a Christian, and then they started to blow whistles and make a lot of noise and a lot of racket. And ultimately what ended up happening was it just got really bad and really like sort of louder and louder and more problematic. But the security guards who were there didn't do anything to stop it. So this boy, and I want to like tell you this to like sort of make things even like, more real. The boy who was becoming a bar mitzvah, he read beautifully from the Torah. He did what he needed to do. He, to his credit, stayed focused and didn't let those distractions get in his way. But he actually had pre-written, of course, a Devar Torah about how meaningful it was for him to stand at that place, in the old city, at the Kotel, and to realize that this was about him not just being a part of his own Jewish community, but him being a part of the greater Jewish community, right? And that's what this bar mitzvah trip was about for him. It was about being a part of like a bigger Jewish people, which was why being there in that moment was so special. And he looked up in the middle of delivering his Devar Torah, and he laughed. Because as he was delivering those words, all of these people were basically trying to interfere with the service of him becoming a bar mitzvah, and they were calling him names and calling him like a Christian. So probably the low light of the whole event was that there was someone who grabbed the siddur, probably a similar one as the one that we used, and they tore it up and then blew their nose in the siddur. And it felt like it was like how could this be? Like, how could the whole thing be? How could it be that this was a section that was given so that people could, so that we could come and others could come and celebrate, with both men and women and however you identify sexually together, and that people could pray together, and that it didn't have to be the way that the sort of ultra-Orthodox believe prayer should be. And then it all just sort of devolved. So this feels bad on a whole bunch of fronts. One of it is just that, this is not Israel, right? This is a very distinct group of people, ultra-Orthodox, who are trying to make their case and also who, feel a certain way about the prayer that liberal Jews pray and the services that we hold. But this Sunday is actually Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, which is the time that we acknowledge the sort of beginning of the siege of Jerusalem. It's the outer walls on this Sunday that we sort of mourn for, that those walls were penetrated, those walls were gone through, and then ultimately the 3 weeks culminate in Tisha B'Av. And the culmination of Tisha B'Av is when we mourn for the destruction of the temple that was. And we sit on the ground and we read from Eicha and we lament. We lament that, the loss of our temple as it stood, and also in many ways what we've come to understand is at the heart of it is sinat chinam, which is senseless hatred, not from other people towards the Jews, but within the Jewish community. And so the irony can't be lost, that in the moment that we're starting to think about how baseless hatred, right, the way that we treat each other and the impact of that on our holy cities and also in our holy, Judaism and Israel, that's exactly around the time that things like this are happening. So I brought this, and I want to wrap up with this because I'm taking too long, but I brought this issue to Hartman, my second to last night. And as I brought the issue to Hartman, I said, what should we do? As thought leaders, people that have been exploring these issues for so long, what do you think? What do we go back to our communities and say about things like this? And it was interesting because the English newspapers ran the stories, but not the Israeli papers. They didn't really run this story. And so one of the things that came about was this opportunity perhaps, and this is sort of where I want to think about this together, but what Rabbi Daniel Hartman said, which was interesting to me, is basically how many congregants do you have? I said, we have a lot. We have, over 1,600 families. And he said, what would happen if 10 bar bat mitzvah each year, if you brought 10 bar bat mitzvah, like 10 bar bat mitzvah families came to Ezrat Yisrael, to this place? And what would happen if other people did the same, and other people did the same, and other people did the same? And eventually, this davening and this experience became something that other people grew used to. And I thought it was an interesting idea, because what that could look like is us being stakeholders in building not only the Israel that has the values that we believe in and hold most dear, but also that can tolerate and become familiar with a Judaism that also looks like the Judaism that we can practice. So I don't know if that's the answer. I think it would be hard to be those 10 bar bat mitzvah kids for a long while. But I do know that Israel is so beautiful in its soul. And we can't allow, a small group of people that can't understand why the answer might be loving each other to get in our way of creating that vision, and even a new vision for a new day. So Shabbat Shalom.
Musaf service begins with the Chatzi Kaddish, page 374. 374.
יתגדל ויתחדש שמי רבה וילמד יברכרותי וימליך מלכותי וחייכון ומחורות חייכו בית ישראל ועלו זמן קריב ומרו אמן יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם ולעולמי עמיה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי קדושה בריחו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תשבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמה ויאמרו אמן.
Rising together, page 376.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו אלוהי אברהם אלוהי יצחק ואלוהי יעקב אלוהי שרה אלוהי רבקה אלוהי רחל ואלוהי לאה האל הגדול הגיבור והנורא אלוהיון כל מלך חסדים טובים וקונה הכל וזוכר חסדי אבות ומביא גואל לבני בניהם למען שמו באהבה מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן ברוך אתה אדוני מגן אברהם וזרעת שרה אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני מחיי מתים אתה רב להושיע מכלכל חיים בחסד מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים תומך נופלים ורופא חולים ומתיר אסורים ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר מי כמוך בעל גבורות ומי דומה לך מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה ונאמן אתה להחיות מתים ברוך אתה אדוני בחיי המתים.
Page 378.
נעריצך ונקדישך כסוד שיח שורפי קודש המקדישים שמך בקודש ככתוב על kadosh, kadosh, Adonai Tzvaot, Melech kol haaretz, kivodo, kivodo malei olam, misharetav shoalim zeh lazeh, ayim ekom kivodo, lumatam baruch yomeru, baruch kivod, Adonai, mi mekomo, hu yifen verachamim, veyachonam hamyachadim, shemo, erev avoker, bechol yom tamid, pa'amayim be'ahava, shema omrim, shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Hu Eloheinu, Hu Avinu, Hu Malkeinu, Hu Moshienu, Vehu Yashmienu, Berachamav Shenid, Leine kol chai liot, Lachem le'Elohim, Ani Adonai Elohechem, Uvdivrei kodsheha, Katuv le'mor, Yimloch Adonai le'olam, Elohai Zion, Lidor vador, Hallelujah. Lidor vador, Nagi kodlecha, Ulnetzach netzachim kedushatecha naktish, Veshivcha Eloheinu mimhinu lo'emush le'olam ba'ed, Ki el melech gadol ve'kadosh ata, Baruch atah Adonai, ha'el hakadosh.
Continuing with quiet prayer through page 394.
Shalom bimromav says shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imeru amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imeru amen. Ve'imeru amen.
Certainly may be seated, and the full Kaddish is on page 398.
יתקרא ויתקרא שמי רבה, ועלמא דברכנותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון ובימיכון ובחיי כל בית ישראל, ועגלה ובזמן קריא ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה לעולם ולעלמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי קודשה בריחו לילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה תאמירן בלמה ואמרו אמן. תתקבל צלותון ובטון דכל ישראל קודם ובהון דבישמעיה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמעיה וחיים עלינו וכל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו amen.
On page 400, Ein Kelohenu.
Ein Kelohenu, Ein Kadonenu, Ein Kemalkenu, Ein Kemoshienu, Mich Elohenu, Mich Adonenu, Mich Malkeinu, Mich Moshienu, Nodel Eloheinu, Nodel Adonenu, Nodel Malkeinu, Nodel Moshienu, Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu, Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוצר הארץ, ובמושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגובהי מרומים. Eloheinu Eidon, Emet Malkeinu Efesulato, Kakatu V'Torato, V'Adatayom V'Hashivota Elevavecha, Ki Adonai Hu Elohim B'Shamayim, ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו
Pause now to offer condolences of the congregation to members of our community who have been bereaved during the past week. This week to the family of the late Dr. Melvin Corden, to the family of the late Nina Malakin, and to the family of the late David Rosenberg. In solemn testimony to that unbroken chain of faith that we believe links us one generation to the next, those who are in mourning, also if you're observing Yahrzeit today, will you please rise? Mourner's Kaddish, page 410. 410, Mourner's Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah.
Amen.
V'alma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei. V'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael. V'agala v'izman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehi shmei rabbah mevorach le'olam olavel v'yah. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar, v'yitaleh, v'yitalal, shemei dekudsha b'richut. Le'ela minkol birchata, v'shirata, tushbechata, v'nechemata, damiran v'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya. Chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Seh shalom v'imrumav, huya aseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. May be seated. Schedule of services this evening, online only, Mincha, Marav, and Abdallah, beginning at 8:30. Again, that's online only. Tomorrow morning, Sunday service time, 9:15 in the morning. Sunday afternoon, 5:30 in the morning, both live and online, so here and also online, and Sunday evening online only. And after services this morning, please join us for a Kiddush, which will be held in the Offit Auditorium. And we'll conclude singing on page 412, Adon Olam.
Adon Olam asher malach b'terem kol yitzir nivra li'ein nasa v'chefzo gol azai melech shemo nikra azai melech shemo nikra ve'acharei kichlot hakol levado yimlok nora ve'hu haya ve'hu over ve'hu yeh v'tif ara ve'hu yeh v'tif ara ve'hu echad ve'ein sheni le'am shilo le'achbira ve'li reshit ve'li tachlit ve'lo ha'oz ve'am Yisra ve'lo ha'oz ve'am Yisra ve'hu eli ve'chai go'ali ve'tzor chevli ve'et zara ve'hu nisi umanos li minat kosi ve'yom ekra minat kosi ve'yom ekra bi'ado afki ruchi ve'et ishan ve'ayira ve'im ruchi keviati Adonai li ve'lo ira Adonai li ve'lo ira Yevarechecha Adonai ve'yishmerecha.
May the Lord bless you and protect you.
Yair Adonai panav elecha v'yichuneka.
the Lord show you kindness and be gracious to you.
Yisarnai v'navilecha v'yaseim lecha shalom.
Bestowing favor upon us, granting us peace.
Amen. Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom. Hey! Shabbat, 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 Shabbat shalom.
Great work.
Thank you.